O'Chelli effect.
I'm a big fan of the show.
Chuck O'Chelli, and he's been known for many years as a blind PFK researcher specializing in intelligence agency involvement in multiple assassination, propaganda, and other global criminal operations in the 20th and 21st centuries.
Your listeners are extremely fortunate to have you.
And now, the most underrated voice in all media.
Chuck O'Chelli!
June 8, 2020, allegedly, according to that thing we call a calendar. And yes, this is the show you were looking for, and likely in the place you were looking for it in. Either way, probably catching it further on down the stream via your fondle slab of choice and all that good stuff. But we are live at OCHELLI.com, of course, on your radio apps and all that good stuff, and a few other places. Anyway, it is a Moon Day Monday, the first broadcast day of the week, and I am very happy to have you with me. But also, I have a very interesting, thoughtful man who, quite frankly, I am always happy to hear from. I do check in on now and then, but I haven't had him on the show in a long time. Now, it's not because I wouldn't like to speak to him every day. It would be enlightening for me, and I'm very sure it would be enlightening for you to do so on a daily basis. But, you know, I don't like to bother him too much. He's awfully busy. He's got a lot of things going on. And in the second hour, we have Terry Tapp with us, who is regularly with us every other Monday. And we're going to follow up on that last show we did. But, of course, the past 2 weeks have sort of changed the conscious conversation in a lot of places. So who knows? Maybe we'll dip into that, and maybe we'll just check in with my guest, who I'd like to introduce himself. And, you know, really you don't need an introduction for most of my listeners, for sure. But I do know that there are people that suggested that I get you back on. And it's a funny thing because I was thinking the same thing anyway. And it was like, wow, good thing to do. But enough of me. How are you, sir? Who are you? Just in case, you know, people don't know, because I don't do a lot of pre-advertising for this. The podcast will speak afterwards for sure. But go ahead, introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Max IGAN, and it's nice to be here again, Chuck. Always a pleasure to come and talk to you, brother. And it's good to be back on the show again, and good to see that you're still out there putting the word out. You know, we need more of it.
Oh, look, I appreciate that, and man, it has been way too long. You know, and people were starting to talk about who is it that we should be hearing from at this time, and you know, who would be a good, intellectually balanced, spiritually balanced individual to bring on, who is not just screaming from their guts. I mean, look, I was angry at quite a few things recently that have happened. Many of the deceptions that go on, as per usual, trying to decode stuff, trying to explain to people that, you know, there's a reason why narratives are being pushed. There's a reason why your emotions feel like they're being pushed. And there's a reason why you got to tune out of a lot of it. And you gotta think for yourselves, and you gotta look around you and realize that although they spent now 2 weeks almost trying to sell us the world is on fire, that even the United States, which is a hostile territory, make no mistake about it, was not entirely on fire, and that you needed to look around and see that even in the worst case scenarios, the truth was not the truth that most outlets were pushing. Some people want you to live in fear. And again, as a countermeasure, definitely timely for you to show up. So, Max, you know, I don't know if you want to speak to current events. I don't know what you want to speak to. In fact, I just want to open it up to whatever's on your mind, and let us have a palate cleansing conversation here at the beginning of the week with you. So, what is on your mind?
Well, it's crazy. I mean, what's happened to the world in the last year? It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. I mean, like Australia was burning at the beginning of the year, but that was ages ago. That was way back in January.
Oh, does anybody remember that now?
You know? Yeah, that's what I mean. And since then, we had like a threatened world war with Iran, and then look, it's incredible the stuff that's happened this year. And what's happening now with this whole switch of focus to the racial issue? I mean, America was a tinderbox waiting to explode. The people are tired of the lockdown, so now they have to make it explode. And even if it isn't exploding on the streets around you, well, we'll make it explode on the TV for you, so you think it's all exploding around you. It's quite amazing how they've done it all. But the whole shift of attention to the race riots and the protests. I mean, 2 weeks ago we were told that we couldn't go out in the street, we couldn't talk to anybody, we couldn't touch anybody, we had to stay 2 meters apart from everybody. And they've got the government's actually encouraging people to protest and to protest for Black Lives Matter. You had Boris Johnson in England actually encouraging the people to protest as long as they maintain social distancing. Well, how are you going to do that if you're marching in the street, you know? But it's all part of the same plan, you know, with the perceived destabilization of the United States with Black Lives Matter and Antifa. They get to roll out martial law. They get to roll out the military, get to roll out the National Guard. They also get to tell people that, well, look, you all broke the lockdown, and so you all went closer than 1.5 meters apart, and so you've spread the pandemic, and now there's a second wave. Yeah. It gives them an excuse to call the second wave because people are getting sick of it. I don't think people would have tolerated the lockdown for much longer. So you need to give them an intermission from the lockdown whereby they all go out there and break the rules and provide the excuse you need to continue the lockdown and blame the people for it. Mm-hmm. You know, and not only that, but martial law, because things are getting so violent. We've got to bring in militarized police and all the stuff they want to do. So, you know, it's so many multi-layered, this plan. But it's a worldwide plan. It's not just a plan for America. I mean, America is one of the prizes. They definitely want to bring down the United States with this, and I think they have anyway, just people haven't noticed it yet because the influx of, 6.2 trillion, it might even be more than that now, that they've just put into into circulation, and cash into circulation. I mean, this is going to destroy the entire U.S. economy. It can't recover from that. I mean, it's ridiculous how much money they put in circulation. So, you know, it's all about the controlled demolition and keeping people's focus on other things that aren't to do with the bigger issue, keeping people tied up in details and having little focal points. And the whole protests over the death of George Floyd, there's been other black people killed who are actually good people. George Floyd was a complete arsehole. This guy was a porn star. He held a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach and while her house got robbed. He wasn't a nice guy. He's not the sort of guy you should be martyring and having protests all around the world for. I mean, it's terrible that people die in this manner, but there's good people who died that you could be standing up for. Why is it this guy? You know, it's crazy. And if people can't see how contrived it is, well, I don't know what to do with them, Chuck. But,
well, you know what's the
problem?
problem?
It isn't in every city, though. It's just in these places that it's pushed by the media to make you think it's in every city, but it's not, you know. And just that media push creates an underlying feeling of destabilization in every city, you know.
Well, see, and here's what the issue is. All along the whole thing you just laid out, there's all kinds of problems. Because, first of all, the coronavirus thing. I have contended all along that although there is indeed, you know, real disease, it's not a totally imagined thing, that it is no greater a threat than we've ever faced before. It's not unique, that required all these unique measures that shut down and shot down the economy. And that it is not the heavy threat. We're just seeing over and over again that, look, even if it was, you still have the need to inform people, yes, but not lock them down and destroy their ways of making a living. Okay, that's one problem. Second problem, is there real racial issues in America? Absolutely. Is there a real problem with the police being able to, get away with stepping on anybody, putting a knee on anybody's neck, actually, who doesn't have the money to fight back? Yup. That's true. You know what? I don't want to judge George Floyd's character. He didn't deserve to die the way he did, and whatever he did, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, the death penalty, I don't trust the system anyway, but the death penalty is not something I agree with, so, and being killed by a cop for, at that time, something that didn't seem to be anything is terrible, horrible. The fact that they replayed it and they made sure to spread it and it went viral and all that, well, we can talk about the purposes of it. And that's the funny thing, is that this becomes now the justified reaction and another justified reaction, and allegedly, not in my mind, And here's the thing. People did try to peacefully protest, and generally speaking, it's the cops beating on the people that are causing the issues. They sure did want to push the imagery that everything was on fire, but this is very small compared to the larger thing that is occurring here now for 14 days. And not the way the media perceived it for the first week, for sure. It is just outlandish to me that it seems like nobody wants to lock down the idea that, yeah, indeed, there is some of this happening, but the majority of what's happening is this. And the concept of Antifa, there's another fun one. You know what? I am convinced that Antifa does not exist as advertised. And you know why? Because I've tried to join it. Now, there's a funny story to that, and it's because people say that I lean to the left and all this. And you know what? In some ways I do, and then if you ask somebody on the left, they'll tell you that I lean to the right because, I don't know, I think independently, and I don't really care about which side of the equation you're on. I'm trying to be, rational and reasonable about all things. So sometimes I offend people with that, but I'll tell you, I can't seem to join Antifa. I don't see their organized marches happening, actually, except when we come to find out that somebody has, what a shocker, hijacked it just like they do with all these other interesting movements of controversial basis. They turn around, they hijack it, they utilize it for their own means. Now we have measures, counterintelligence, COINTELPRO, all of it converging together. And, oh, by the way, you shouldn't say that there's lots of bad apples in the police department because it's only a few people. The culture of policing, the policy enforcers, is sick. And it's just that simple. And you know what? It has been sick for a long time. And you are also correct that there are so many people who have died in police interactions, one way or another, not worthy of being killed by any legal standard for various reasons. People getting pulled over. You know, Mr. Castillo there got pulled over utilizing his Second Amendment right, informing an officer he was armed. They killed him in a car. That was repulsive and horrific. There's been more than one individual who's been shot for no reason, tased, beaten, and guess what? During the police brutality protests, which were majority peaceful, what we got is, an encyclopedia of images showing us exactly what's wrong with policing. People getting knocked on the back of their heads, getting busted up, maced like as if, somebody's, spraying somebody with a water hose on a hot summer day to try and cool them off. But mace, no problem. Flashbangs, well-armed, extremely well-armed officers on the streets of almost every city. And a debate as to whether we should actually add and ratchet up more military. And, violate all sorts of standards and practices that, are seemingly like things that kept us a little bit civilized at certain points in our history, to restrain the policy enforcers, who, by the way, are not law enforcement because they don't know anything about law. But here's the thing, all that stuff that you just talked about, even though you're clear and concise about it, there is so much to unwrap in the grand deception, in the distraction, in the deflection of the arguments that everybody's making, and I don't care if they claim to be outside of the mainstream or not. It seems to me like everybody's gotten lost in a whole different pocket of the sauce, and they've forgotten what the meal's supposed to be. I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just me.
Yeah,
what do you think?
Everyone's tied up in the details. They're not looking at the bigger picture and how it's all being played. People can't see the forest for the trees. They're too busy examining all the trees because it's fun to look at the leaves. It's fun to look at the branches. It's fun to follow all these rabbit holes and, live the spy novel version of reality. They're not really seeing the bigger picture. And you're right. I mean, how contrived was this and how promoted was this? I mean, apparently you're not allowed to have violent videos on YouTube or social media or Facebook or anything. So how can we have this cop kneeling on the neck of this guy for 8 minutes and slowly suffocating him or whatever happened, and you have it go viral as it did? How is this allowed to happen if we're not allowed to see violent stuff? So it's completely contrived. The whole thing has been completely set up, and it's about shifting people's attention and just leading people where you want them to go. And as I said, the whole COVID thing that was rolled out, the social crediting, the social distancing, the tracing, the contact tracing. If you look at the guidelines for U.S. contact tracing, this is absolutely horrendous stuff. And they provide an excuse for all that. They can roll all that out now through these race riots. They can create the concept of why you need militarized police. And the police, I mean, they're making the police, any time the police are violent, they're getting it on film and they're pushing it because they want the people against the police. They want you to see it this way. You say, oh, now maybe we should defund the police. We can't trust Minneapolis police force anymore. So they want to sack the whole lot of them, defund them, and then replace them with a more responsible group of people, which will essentially be privatizing the police force. Of course, they may have to bring in the military in that interim, I would imagine, just to fill up that gap while they're working out who these privatized police will be. Talking about removing $100 million worth of funding from LA police as well, because of the violence, so it's all portrayed that way, to put the people against the police, to give them the excuse to get rid of these guys. We'll bring in robots. That'll be much better. They won't even be bad because they will just do what the algorithms tell them to do. I mean, you can see where we're heading into. It may take them a little while to set it up, but they want to move all of this into an AI-governed state. You've got the robot dogs wandering around Singapore now. They had robot dogs here ensuring social distancing is carried out in Sydney, I believe, at some game they had down in Sydney. So, they're bringing all of this AI stuff in. They've got a virtual police officer you can talk to in New Zealand now. When you walk into the police station, there's a little screen there, and this woman comes up on the screen who looks like she's no determined gender and no determined race, kind of coffee-coloured, indeterminate race, indeterminate gender. So don't offend anybody, move everybody into that line of thought. You can see where they're going with it all. And with all of this, the chaos that they're creating, this whole social distancing and social crediting and all the stuff is coming in underneath it to keep you safe. And the big goal here is to just create as much chaos and turbulence as possible, and get rid of these people. They don't, it's a really big depopulation plan that's happening. And all they need to do is get enough kids to go into the school to go through the next 5 or 7 years and get programmed into this social distancing, gender neutral reality. And they can just get rid of the rest of the population. They only want 500 million people here, remember. So, all it's going to take is the next generation of kids to enter into the scholastic system with all of this stuff that's been put in place now, and get them to go in there. And a lot of people are saying, if you won't abide by the social distancing, then we don't even want your kids to come to this school. I mean, normally there's no way you could keep your kids out of school. The government wouldn't let it. You get fined if you keep your kids home. They're trying to outlaw homeschooling and all sorts of stuff. So now they're kind of promoting that and saying, well, if you're not following, we've got things in Australia here saying that if your kids, if we find out you've had other families over to visit your family and you haven't abided by social distancing when the kids have been there, if these kids from other families have come in and used your toilet or whatever, then we don't want your children at our school because you're not abided by the social distancing guidelines, and we don't want all the work we've done at the school to be destroyed by you not abiding by government guidelines when you're at home. So this is the kind of the people they want in the school. And all they got to do is keep the rest of the population occupied while this generation goes through school. And they will come out of like primary school, entering high school. They'll be nice little brown shirt spies and spying on all their parents and telling everybody where there isn't social distancing carried out. And with the tracing program, it gives them an opportunity to put everybody in lockdown anyway. And they've got the excuse for it now with the race riots. All these marches they've had right around the world, they've got the excuse to continue the lockdown, provide an excuse why there's a second wave, which they're talking about, the second wave of pandemic. No, it was all you guys because you went out and broke the rules, So it's so many facets to this, but it all leads towards the same agenda, and all of these actions are plays. And when you've got the media and the government all promoting this whole, it's terrible, George Floyd, it just went viral, everybody, marches everywhere, literally approved by the government. The marches here in Queensland were approved by the government. And I'm even wondering whether they even happened. I mean, we're told that on Saturday there were 30,000 people marching in the streets of Brisbane to protest the death of George Floyd. It was a Black Lives Matter rally. I live 1 hour from Brisbane. I didn't even hear about this happening. And I've got friends in Brisbane, and they're all activists, and I don't know anybody who went to that rally. I don't know anybody who even knew that rally was happening, and yet we see a photograph in the newspaper of 30,000 people in Brisbane. I'd like someone who was at that rally to contact me, someone who saw the rally to contact me. I mean, did it even happen? I'm kind of wondering this. Did it even happen? Are they just pushing this out in the newspapers and telling us there was 30,000 people there? Because I don't know anybody who saw it. How do you hide 30,000 people? How does no one hear about this? You know, I live in the activist community. Why wouldn't someone message me and say, hey, Max, there's a big rally in Brisbane tomorrow? You know, so I'm wondering if it even happened. It's really got to that point where they're able to spin the news so dramatically that they can pretty well put anything in the paper they want and use it as the excuse they need to push whatever agenda they want forward. And that seems to be a lot of what's happening in the United States as well. I mean, you know, you can get a bunch of people protesting on one little corner block, and they'll tell you the whole city is in a state of chaos, when very, very likely it isn't. It's just this one little section, which is probably all paid protesters, which have just gone there to smash stuff up because that's what they're paid to do. So, you know, it's very difficult to find out what's going on, but it's happening everywhere. It's happening in Canada, it's happening in Vancouver, happening in England, happening here. All around the world, there's protests over this death of George Floyd, because they pushed that video and made it so viral, and they made it. It's so, I mean, you're kneeling on a man's neck for 8 minutes. I mean, you know, you don't do that on camera, get your face on camera and get all that out there the way it was if it isn't planned to be done. You know, and the whole debate of, whether he was an actor and whether George Floyd died or whatever, that's irrelevant. It's what the event is what it was staged for, what it's being used for, what the effect will be. Because obviously it was a staged event. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gone so viral. There wouldn't be so many people pushing it. So people need to be really, really careful at how they're being played with all this, brother.
No, I appreciate where you're coming from. I got to tell you, I'm going to disagree with one thing, and that is that I don't feel as though the event was staged. Now, how it has been utilized afterwards, I'll tell you why I don't feel it was staged, though. Not just because it's my gut and, you know, and I know best, but the fact is this, all across the country, and also the events in the United States, I don't know how to look at the international reaction, but the events in the United States are a fraction of what's actually happened being reported. I know people that were on the ground in circumstances that were filming with their cameras different events, and they report to me that there is a very large event going on in a lot of places that were not reported on at all. Where you see a couple thousand people in very small cities getting together. It does seem to be a larger thing. It is widespread, and quite frankly, it is organic to the reaction. Now, I'm not surprised. As far as that event being staged, I got to tell you, I don't feel that way, because over and over and over again, real people are absolutely abused by the police, whether they're wearing body cams, whether they're on film or not. They barely make an attempt to cover up what they're doing. That is how criminal the police on the streets are in the United States. In truth, they are part of a criminal organization, in my opinion. And I'll tell you what it is. They have no problem abusing most people who simply don't have the money to fight back. That's not a liberal perspective. That's not a conservative perspective. I'm telling you that I will not call any law enforcement, in quotes, for any reason. I will settle my own issues. I will not, because to me, I'll tell you what, even if I got a neighbor in a dispute with a neighbor, I'd rather they point a gun at me than call the police. Because at least I've got one person who I can deal with, maybe rationally, who's pointing that weapon at me. Once you bring in these policy enforcers, you have asked for things to go much, much worse. I've been beaten up by the cops. I have been illegally searched. I have been abused by them. I have been unlawfully detained, and everything else. And I don't have a criminal record, Max. I even when they did rough me up and do everything else, they couldn't figure out a way to charge me. Okay? And that's the thing. You get to walk away and you feel lucky that you didn't get killed, thrown in jail for something you didn't do. This is not a positive interaction here. In the U.S., if you're in any area where, quite frankly, it's not a rich neighborhood, okay, and I've lived in a variety of states. It's not just in Georgia. It's not just in New Jersey. I mean, those are two places I say I've lived all the time, but I've lived in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, California, North Carolina, okay, and guess what? Same situation prevails. And the fact is that they are not peace officers. They are not individuals who know the law. They don't know your rights. They don't care. And on camera or not, they have turned around and abused people that I mean, who could not defend themselves, Max. I mean, just directly. I know them. I've interviewed a guy who was in a wheelchair who was being thrown out of his house, and they tased him and his wife, and brutalized him to throw him out of his house. Okay, I interviewed that man. I have definitely talked to other people who have been people that I've known for other reasons, who got involved in interactions. Kim, the mother of my son, I watched her get taken in for a failure to appear in court. And quite frankly, the only reason why I didn't get involved in the physical scuffle is because I had my infant son with me. And I didn't want both of us to get locked up and then have them take him for child protective services because no parents home now. I mean, this is the reality here. The thing that happened to George Floyd, I'm not surprised. I don't think it could have been staged. Because it is the type of thing that happens all the time, doesn't get reported, and quite frankly, even though some cops lose their jobs, they usually don't lose much else. And occasionally there's a lawsuit settled or whatever, but that's money. Lives are being lost, blood is being spilled, skin is being taken from people, no matter what color it is. And quite frankly, if you're black in America, here's a reality too, and it is something that we did need to get to, and I don't know it's being gotten to properly, but quite frankly, if you're darker skinned here, you're twice as likely to get the kind of treatment that I've always gotten from the police, whether I was doing something wrong or right or nothing. So, I mean, there is a reality here. But again, all of that can be put aside. Because this concept of defunding the police, not a bad one, except one problem. That means that they're going to bring in more of these social workers and other half-assed, excuse me for the expression, individuals who are going to come and interfere in your life and have the color of law and authority over you and be involved in your life. And by the way, help to feed those little brown shirts you're talking about coming up, which is why my son has not been to school. I am a little bit worried. He's 5. He's going to be 6 soon. Playing with other kids in the neighborhood is an issue, has been for a while because I won't vaccinate him. All right, but now on top of that, social distancing. Now you're cross-contaminated if your kids play. What the hell kind of world are we coming up with where kids can't, go out and eat a little dirt together and cross-contaminate each other? Okay, this is not the natural world, Max. I know I said a mouthful. But really, man, I don't believe that was staged. I know that there is a hostile circumstance here. I also know that people are being conditioned to behave in a way which is unnatural and is not going to help us, excuse me for using the word progress, but progress as people, as communities, and as individuals who get to decide our own destiny. I see it all going out the window with all of this.
Well, I totally agree with that. When I say staged, I think he was probably just a guy that was arrested and it happened, but also I think they pushed it to the point. I mean, I think they wanted something like that on film. It wasn't George Floyd, it would have been someone else. But they wanted to go out and kill a black man that day, I think.
Well, Breonna Taylor,
what they can do with that event.
One quick interruption. Breonna Taylor didn't get the same traction, and yet they served a no-knock warrant on her home. Ahmaud Arbery died just a little bit south of me, which, by the way, I'm not too far from those Georgia Guidestones, too, by the way. Anyway, Breonna Taylor was a woman, got herself killed, shot 8 times, no-knock warrant. In the middle of the night, her boyfriend got up, thought the house was being broken into, attempted to defend himself. They dropped the charges against him, but at first charged him with assaulting an officer who came and barging into his house, breaking down the door for a no-knock warrant. Guess what? The address was wrong. I mean, again, there is a culture of we can do what we want to you. And that has to end. I do feel for some of what's being spoken in these protests because for far too long, I mean, I got to watch. I was born in 1972, but I've gotten to watch the militarization of the police amp up. If I were black and born in 1972, I don't think I would have watched the progress of it climb up the hill because I would have already known that I was the enemy in a lot of locations in this country to those blue people, which I think is the real color problem we have. I'm sorry, Max, but I wanted to interject that before you go further. You're saying that George Floyd, you're thinking maybe it wasn't created for this. It's not something that was manufactured. But
not manufactured,
Yeah.
but it's definitely they wanted something like that. I think that the plan was to kill a black man, and because of what they can do with it. I mean, look at the reaction from it. I don't think they got a bunch of actors and went out there and said, okay, well, here's a set and let's act this out, staged in that way. But I think they wanted to kill a black man. And as soon as they got the opportunity to get one on film and do that, I mean, I even question who the people were who filmed that. You know, I really question how it was able to be filmed the way it was and just put out there the way it was. It's not normal for that sort of thing to be filmed in that amount of, you know, something so dramatic and to be got so clearly on film with all the cops standing around there just setting the stage that they wanted to set. To create the mindset they wanted to create in people. They want people to really hate the police and really get out there and riot and be violent about it. The best way you can do it is to have them go and kill a black man because of, you know, the history of what the U.S. police have done. So, I mean, sure, this might have happened to a whole bunch of people in the same day, but there was more than one black man killed in the United States that day by police. You know, it wouldn't surprise me at all. Mm-hmm. But I think this was done in a certain way to create the feel and create the exact response that it's created. So in that thing, I'm saying like staged. The whole thing was staged to happen, but not, you know, deliberately set up with these actors. If you can kind of get what I mean.
Oh no, I get you. It's just that there are some people that are now seizing upon this, trying to say that it's, you know, the guy from the Cash Cab TV show, the stand-up comedian, is actually and all this, and I'm like, that's garbage, you know.
There's all this, it's all fake brigade. No one ever dies at these shootings. They're all crisis actors. This sort of stuff does incredible damage. And people put that out there straight away. I mean, it's right. A part of the COINTEL narrative just to tie people up in infighting and details and all this stuff, which they can't prove. It's all speculation and conjecture, you know.
Oh no, I just wanted to be sure to exclude. I just wanted to be sure to exclude you from that group. In case anybody got confused real quick, there is Max Egan on board with it? No. That's not what he's saying. No, okay, sorry. No, I just want to make sure.
You can totally exclude me from that group. But by having said that, I mean, I do think they faked some events. There were some that were completely staged, and they were crisis actors, and they were obviously done that way in order to create this whole thing that now everyone goes, oh, well, if they did that, then it means it's all fake. No, they did that just so you would think that. You know, people don't understand how easily they're led with all this and how easily controlled the narrative is in the independent media, and you know, it isn't. I've always found that in the alternate media there was a certain acceptable narrative, and if you step outside that, you become the enemy. Right. So in many ways, the alternate media is just as controlled as the mainstream media. There's a whole bunch of subtle misdirection in here where people really aren't allowed to think for themselves, and if they do, they get attacked. Like, just even you disagree with me before. In some situations, in some radio shows, you'd have someone calling you a shill by now because you disagree with one little point of one sentence or whatever. You know, This is how bad it's got. It's difficult to even construct a sentence these days without someone picking up on one word and claiming there's some hidden meaning to it. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's how bad it's got. So it's important to step away from all that. And like I said, when you really look at it, people who are arguing over whether these were crisis actors or whatever, it's irrelevant. You're just arguing over details that you can't prove, and you're not looking at the bigger picture. Right. What is the event being used for? Why was it made so public? What can they get out of this? Where is it going? What is it for? You know, whether he died or not, it's irrelevant at this point. What is relevant is where this event is leading us to, and that's what people need to look at. You know, and you've got to put it all and realize it's just one finger of the same hand. It's all the one thing, all going towards the one direction. And if they're wanting you to look here, well, what are they doing over there that you're not looking at? That's the important thing to keep in focus. And like I said, all of this COVID and all this contact tracing and all the stuff that they put in place isn't going away. It hasn't gone away simply because people went out there and marched in all these riots. So you've got to apply what the mixing of all these people in these riots, how this is going to work in with the COVID and the contact tracing and all the stuff that they're rolling out in this whole lockstep scenario that they're creating. So, you know, you've really got to look at it as just simply another piece of the jigsaw puzzle and realize that it was made so public and these riots were promoted so openly for a reason. And it isn't because they care about black people and they want integrity from police officers.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head before, too, because here's the fact. They're already talking, and they were talking about it subtly at first while they were trying to show you the country's on fire, which it wasn't. I say again, it was not. There were some fires. True, there was some reaction, and quite frankly, I took heat, Max. You want to talk about getting hit? I can't tell you. I got more emails about the fact that I said I don't really care about the property loss. And I don't. I don't care about things. I'm more concerned about how many people are going to get injured and killed by this than anything. I'm concerned about, human life. I'm sorry. They burned down the Nike store. So what? They burned down the police station. As a matter of fact, so what?
The thing is with the property loss and the property damage, it's the destruction of infrastructure, it's a problem because, I mean, you might want to wear some shoes next year and you're going to find that there won't be any there because, the Nike store burned down. You're going to find that
look, I know that sucks.
You want to go and buy some food from Walmart, but the Walmarts have been destroyed. The shops have been destroyed.
I know.
So the food chain is breaking down. The supply chain is breaking down. And by destroying all the infrastructure in your cities, you create a dangerous place in the cities, and you're basically turning it into the third world. And the food trucks are going to stop running. The supply chain is going to break down because of the destruction, which is another reason why they want to do it.
When
people talk about, equality for all nations and equality across the world, they're not talking about bringing the third world up to the first world. They're talking about knocking the first world down to the level of the third world, and that's what they're doing. And people are doing it themselves. All these people are staging all these riots and stuff. They're going to go to the supermarket, go to buy some food in a couple of weeks, and they'll find the trucks haven't come in because the town's now a dangerous place. You see, so that's why it's all done that way.
No, I get it, and I'll tell you how well I get it. I grew up in New Jersey mostly. Okay, and in New Jersey, there's a town called Asbury Park. And Asbury Park today, as it stands, is a very gentrified, high-end kind of area and all that. It's got wine stores. And excuse me, I'm going to take a drink, but it's got like wine stores and antique shops in it, okay? Now, when I grew up there, it didn't look like that. What it was it looked like a demilitarized zone, okay? It was a rough town. And I'll tell you why it was a rough town. Because the riots in the late 60s, which had destroyed many American cities. Not the biggest banner headline was Asbury Park, but guess what? It was destroyed during that time period. And you know what happened? Nobody came back. No businesses, hardly. No infrastructure was repaired. Buildings were just left there by the major corporations that had investments in their property and everything else. They walked away. Okay, and what happens is you got no supply chain. You got nobody trying to do anything except put in your corner stores, which sell, wonderful items that are definitely toxic, and that's it. That's all you got. A bunch of abandoned buildings, rough areas that even the police don't want to go into, entire apartment complexes that are turned into nothing but dens of for crack, basically in the 80s. And then at certain points, heroin took over the certain sections. But, whatever trend was there, cheap drugs. And that's what hit. And that was all that was available in there. It was a rough area. And it stayed that way for, 30 years. All right. So the entire time I was growing up there, it was a rough area. Not much to it. Now, before it was burned down, it was a shore town. It was an amusement area. It was like a family vacation spot. It was a thriving place where there were musicians and art and everything else, where it was, not necessarily a gentrified, come on in, hipsters, and enjoy your classic stuff area, but actually a thriving place where they put in a transportation hub and a few other things. Okay? And it was a direct line, very short hop, skip, and a jump from New York City to there, except it was a clean beach. It was a beautiful boardwalk. Palace Amusements. Anybody who doesn't believe me, go look this stuff up and then take a look at the difference between the 1960s and the 1970s and 80s in Asbury Park. All right? So there you go. There's my time growing up there. I know what happens when there's no money or, they see nothing in the cost-benefit analysis to come back in and try and rebuild after this stuff happens. And at the same time, I'm still telling you that my primary concern is people's lives. And you know what? Maybe some cities do need to die. I mean, maybe they do. And maybe some people need to get the hell out of them because the situation is not working. I mean, and I just provided that as not like a solution like I know best, but I mean, my automatic reaction is I'd rather not see people killed. I'd rather not see people bleed in the streets. I would really rather see this continue to be peaceful. And again and again and again, although the mainstream media stayed away from the front lines, people with their phones, oddly enough, when they didn't, by the way, put a communication clamp down on Washington, D.C. briefly, which is not a state in the union, by the way, so that's why they could roll military into the streets there, hint, hint. But here's the thing. To me, it was like, look, we got to find a way to make this so that this doesn't become the country is on fire. Because indeed what will happen is whether it's temporarily or it lasts 3 decades like it did in Asbury, you will have disruption for the people that have nothing to do with this, who are sitting there sheltering in place and trying to just get by. And the funny thing is, all of this plays so well directly, and even the liberal perception of let's defund the police and bring in more social workers and all this, even the left and the right, both hands working together to make sure they clamp down on you. And here's what it is. It all leads to justification for now we got to contact trace. Now we got to make sure that, hey, look, maybe we should watch out for the next time this is going on. Let's put more cameras out there. Big brother, little brother, let's invite all the brothers into the surveillance state and make sure that we can collect this data and use it to allow people to trade, move around, do whatever. And isn't that interesting? Because that's what it all boils down to. If you don't have clearance on your app or whatever, or on your personal profile or your social credit system app, whatever that'll be, you might not be able to work. You might not be able to go and participate in commerce. You might not be able to leave your house because you were exposed to somebody with COVID or whatever the next big bad boogeyman disease is. So that combined with this, it goes from all directions and leads to exactly the same thing. And Max, that's what you were speaking about, and I'd love for you to I'll shut up. I really will. Use the rest of the time to try and help me explain how it all goes into this thing where you are no longer, first of all, not entitled to your privacy, but also your freedoms are now privileges which are granted, and you're going to be subject to not only the algorithms, but who knows what else will be introduced into the system. I mean, AI might actually be as scared as I am to say this, AI might be the lesser of two evils when you let some other twisted individuals who are ill-informed, ignorant, and fully willing to be part of the snitch society at you. You might be better off with just the algorithms. I mean, really, because this is ugly, and ugly.
Going, though,
go ahead.
Well, the way it's going, though, with the algorithms and social crediting and all the stuff that's going, and you're right, it's all interconnected. And, when they want to bring in this whole, strict social crediting, COVID tracing, contact tracing situation, a lot of people wouldn't go along with it. But when they see how much the country has been destroyed, and when people, the Karens and the Aarons and the soccer mums and all the people who believe the government and believe the television, when all those people see the chaos that is created via the people that are out there doing these protests and the people that wouldn't abide by the social tracing, they are going to support the complete lockdown of these people. And it's going to get to the point where you won't be able to even go into a supermarket. You won't be able to get a driver's license. You won't be able to enter any public space unless you have an app. And that app shows that you are safe through contact tracing. Mm-hmm. And then anytime you go to any area, all it takes is for one person to be there. It could be an activist that they don't like. And if you've been in the company of that person for too long, all they have to do is declare that one of you, you turn your app red, say, well, you're in contact with someone who got COVID. It gives them an excuse to lock down anybody. And all of the soccer mums and all of the program people are all going to support it. That's what people aren't getting. All of this is contrived. The whole thing is contrived, and it's all leading towards the same goal, the same agenda, and it always has been. And people have to see how easily they're being led through it all, But you're absolutely right in everything you were saying then. And people simply aren't seeing the bigger picture. They're just allowing themselves to be led. and they're not seeing how all this contact tracing is all going to go in the future, what it's all going to lead to. The digitization of cash as well. They're actually getting people scared of cash through this. And, I don't think it'll even be another type of disease. They can use coronavirus. It'll last forever because we've all got coronaviruses in our body. They've managed to recategorize everything as coronavirus. They're saying people who get strokes now must be a symptom of coronavirus. Rash on your toes is a symptom of coronavirus. If you get vomiting or nausea, that's a symptom of coronavirus.
Well,
isn't that you went out and had a bad steak and a few beers the night before? Nothing like that.
No, fair 10-second fact. It isn't mad cow disease. And here's the deal. Before all this, if you would have looked at the real data, and I know you know this, Max, but half of what people consider to be the common cold, half of it, everybody says, well, that's the rhinovirus, right? Now, if you look at the scientific classification, the rest of 50% of what they say are the common cold are coronaviruses. So,
yeah, exactly. Go look at the back of a bottle of Dettol. It says cures coronavirus. And you look at the common cold. Go and look up in a medical book, common cold, and it'll have coronavirus, rhinovirus.
Yeah.
That's it. It's in medical journals back in the 80s and the 70s. So it's a very, very common thing. So it's the perfect scam. It's the perfect thing that they can use. And they've got people scared of the sniffles. Everyone gets the sniffles when the season changes. Your body has a bit of a detox. You get a bit of a runny nose or whatever. Coronavirus now. You can't go out in public. Got to be isolated, socially isolated. And that's what it's all about, social isolation. See, that's where it's leading to. This is how they lead you into this whole transhumanist AI-driven world. See, in the AI world, you say it might be better under AI, but, in AI, when you're down on social credit points or your app goes red, then the AI simply has to alert the nearest law enforcement officer who will come and put you where you need to be, quarantine you or whatever, and it will be determined by the AI. There won't even be a need for a court system or a judge or a jury because your social credit points and the punishment that you receive for being at that level will already be determined. And all the AI has to do is alert the police officer to go and find this guy, and here is the sentence. He needs to be quarantined for this long, whatever. It gives the police complete, because you still got to have enforcers out there doing this, policy enforcers, police officers that are going and doing what the AI tells them, unless they turn into robots as well, and it all becomes done through surveillance and AI and facial recognition. But they can even do it through eventually, they can limit your access. As soon as your card goes red, your spending power will be removed. It doesn't matter how much money you've got. You won't be able to enter a shop. You won't be able to buy anything because it'll be digital. And even if they roll out the 5G system, well, if you look at DARPA weapons system, 5G is the carrier-away for all active denial systems. So, the communications of 5G is simply secondary to its active denial capabilities. So they could conceivably, if you were out in a shopping center and you created a fuss and you ended up down on social credit points and got to the point where you can't purchase anything, you can't even get a bus home because nothing will work for you anymore, they could conceivably disable you on the spot, simply target you with 5G, disable you on the spot, call law enforcement to come and collect you and take you away. And there's nothing you could do about it. You'd be simply there, having a muscle spasm or whatever, not able to move until they come and get you and disable whatever they're doing to you. That's what they can do with this 5G targeting weapons system. And it's important for people to see this. There's been a lot of speculation and disinformation with the whole 5G thing. People think 5G causes coronavirus. 5G itself, radiation is bad from anything, but 5G is simply a carrier wave. It isn't, malevolent in itself. It's simply a carrier wave. It's what that can be used, what applications can be used with that carrier wave. You look at microwave cannons and just like I said, go to DARPA, look up active denial systems. You'll find hundreds of patents for different weapon systems that use this carrier wave. Any military application of electromagnetism or frequency weapons is all that's the carrier wave for it. So that's important to see as well. Where we're going, and like I said, once you get these kids now that are being led into this system, when they come out through school, they're going to have no concept of what freedom looks like. They're going to have no reference point for what freedom looks like. And a lot of what this is about now is eliminating the older people, eliminating older populations, making the place and destabilizing as much as possible. Like you say, a lot of these towns won't rebuild. Where are these people going to go? You're going to have so many homeless people come out of this, so many people on welfare come out of this. You've already got 40 million people registered for unemployment in the United States in the last 2 or 3 months. 40 million people registered for unemployment. It's ridiculous, and that's just going to continue. And the more this happens and these riots and this infrastructure is destroyed and these towns are destroyed, and that's more people, more businesses, more people that are getting into this welfare state. And that's what it's all about. They want to create a welfare state. The more you can destroy, the more dependent you become on government. Because at the end of the day, once you finish rioting, you finish burning all the stores down, you're going to want to go and buy a hamburger or something. You're going to want to go and buy something to eat, and you're not going to be able to get it. Right. And you're not going to have a job to be able to go and get any money to get it. You're going to need your welfare payment from the government, and you're going to need the government-supplied store to go and buy the government-supplied food because you need to survive. So people don't realize how they are helping in constructing this whole New World Order dependency system by their own actions and what these riots are really leading to. It's so multi-pronged. Like I said, you got the contact tracing, you got the whole lockdown, the COVID, you got the welfare state, you got the destruction of infrastructure, the unemployment. All of it comes from the same thing, and it all leads to the same direction.
Right. And at the same time, what do we have at the head of the alleged government? We have, the clown show, a bunch of lip service, not really caring about what happens to the people. Just doing what it is they're doing. And, the trillions you were talking about, which they did put out, for COVID relief, right? The CARES Act and all this other stuff, it dwarfs what they've already dumped into the stock market to keep that going, what they've already dumped into corporate bailouts, there are checks that just keep getting written. There's nothing in the Treasury. It's just there. And, nobody seems to want to look at it now. I mean, there used to be a group of people that said, we got to stop this. This is insanity. That's all gone because it's not part of the program anymore. It's irrelevant. People still want to talk to me about fractional reserve banking. Well, what happens if you don't even care about the fractions? It's just whatever it is we say it is. And that's a bizarre thing. Look, before we're done, which will be in the next few minutes, I want to make sure that I let people know where it is, because I see you're still putting out. I mean, and you've been around a long time doing this, and I appreciate you, man. I have always appreciated your very level and intelligent analysis of the game that is being played against all of us. Which, by the way, that's something to consider here. There is an us and there is a them. And it's got nothing to do with the color of your skin, all right? It's got to do with the numbers, and the numbers don't favor the majority of us, okay? So I don't know. Maybe that's just my little throw-in, but for those that don't know, where is it that they can find your work? I know some of it goes up on YouTube, but believe me, they're policing the hell out of that thing now to a degree I've never seen before. Again, I'm probably going to lose my channel again. And I don't curse on the air. I never encourage violence. Most of their rules of conduct, I already follow just as part of my ethical code. But somehow or other, they find a way to undermine people who are not necessarily just feeding into the existing narratives. So I do know that you're available out there, but tell people where they can find the latest from Max Egan, please, and then I'll give you the final word on this hour. And again, in advance, thanks so much for coming on and providing some common sense and some realism to a discussion that has gotten, well, quite a bit uncommon, our discussion anyway, and also a world that has gotten far too unreal to not be real at this point. Okay, yeah, unpack that one for if you want. But Max Egan, where can they find you? And also, like I said, your final word after that.
Well, you can find everything that I do at thecrowhouse.com. That's my website, thecrowhouse.com. I've been kicked off Facebook. You'll find the Crow House YouTube channel as well, but all the links are there on the Crow House. I'm on MeWe now instead of Facebook. I'm also on Hive. I'm on Steemit. I'm on Minds. There's a few other places, Twitter. But, I don't know how long I'll last on some of these platforms. They are censoring things dramatically. But yeah, everything is at thecrowhouse.com. And thanks for having me on, Chuck. It's always a pleasure to come and talk to you. I think we're at such a pivotal point in history. This is honestly one of the most historic points in all of history, because this reset that is happening right now is leading us into AI, into a completely totalitarian technocracy if people don't pay attention. And it's important that people see that all of the stuff we've talked about in the past about leading us into this transhuman technocratic era, this is what all of this is about. This is one of the mechanisms they're using to do it. Order out of chaos. But they first have to create the chaos in order to implement the order that they want. And with the destruction of infrastructure that's happening and the complete loss of self in people's thinking, they're just being led, this mob rule mentality that people are just going along with. It's all leading to a very, very dangerous place. People need to pull back from this and look at things on a larger level, look at the bigger picture. Stop getting caught up in the details. They say the devil's in the details, and it isn't just that you forget to tidy up details when you're building a house or something. It's also when you get caught up in details to the point that you can't see the forest because you're too busy looking at the trees. And that's what a lot of people are doing. And it's important to see how all of these things are related and all of them are leading to a common goal. And not only that, but all of the governments are working together. Forget your concept of enemies and states, and this is all a construct. They are all working together. When you get behind the scenes, we have an international criminal cabal masquerading as an international system of national governments. But what it is actually a multi-generational, multinational criminal cabal. You can think of it as one big family, and they all play the people off against each other, but they are all moving towards a common goal. I mean, in Russia, you got people in lockdown in Russia, people banned from using private transport in Russia. It's happening everywhere. The whole world is experiencing this exact same scenario to greater or lesser degrees in their own countries. So it's really important to look at the bigger picture when trying to deal with this, or we'll never find a way out of it. And the way out of it is to simply remember who we are and step away from it. None of this will work without our compliance. If you want the virus and the riots and everything to go away, turn off your television and reconnect with your family and your neighbors. Thanks for having me on, Chuck.
Absolutely. Look, people point to, the Hegelian dialectic all the time, and they don't fully recognize that it's not just as simple as problem, reaction, solution. Sometimes you got problem, reaction, then a solution. There are patterns that emerge that are not simply in the 3-step plan. And guess what? Political parties count just for the same, as you were saying, this concept of, well, this is nation state versus nation state, and this is this organization. Yeah, at the end of the day, no. There is an us and there is a them. And the them are the people that are working to make sure that the us never gets to really be us. And I can't say it any better than you did about get in touch with your family, your neighbors, everything else. Crowhouse.com. Go there, check out Max Egan's work. If you haven't already, I don't know how you missed it, but if you haven't already, go over there, check it out, and do go to any of these platforms that still have them on it, because I think one of these days, very, very soon, we might all be socially credited out if we're not just on board with whatever the current narrative is. Max Egan in the first hour. I can't do better to start off the week than with Max Egan. Thank you again, sir.
My pleasure, brother. Talk soon.
Absolutely. You guys, stay tuned. In the next hour, we'll be speaking to artist, activist, author Terry Tapp. The OCHELLI Effect continues after this.
WallStreetWindow.com. Gold, silver, the stock market. WallStreetWindow.com.
Perhaps you're invested deeply.
Perhaps you're not in deep enough. Maybe you're thinking about getting started. WallStreetWindow.com. Michael Swanson, the brilliant author of The War State, understood these trends professionally for many years, and now he gives you the benefit of his knowledge. WallStreetWindow.com. Go there now. Go there now. Go there now.
I want them to appreciate the incredible job we're doing. We are doing a job the likes of which has never been done before. You're going to have mental depression for people. You're going to have large numbers of suicides. Take a look at what happens in a really horrible recession or worse. So you're going to have tremendous suicides, but you know what you're going to have more than anything else? Drug addiction. You will see drugs being used like nobody's ever used them before. And people are going to be dying all over the place from drug addiction. I want them to appreciate the incredible job we're doing. We are doing a job the likes of which has never been done before. I want them to appreciate the incredible job we're doing. We are doing a job the likes of which has never been done before. You're going to have mental depression for people. You're going to have large numbers of suicides. Take a look at what happens in a really horrible recession or worse. So you're going to have tremendous suicides, but you know what you're going to have more than anything else? Drug addiction. You will see drugs being used like nobody's ever used them before. And people are going to be dying all over the place from drug addiction.
In Denial, Secret Wars with Airstrikes and Tanks by Larry Hancock. Secret wars became a staple of U.S. covert operations and are still happening today. Larry Hancock's book, In Denial, rips the cover off many of them. Using new files, it exposes things about the Bay of Pigs that no one has ever written about before. It shows why it really failed and why the United States did not learn from it. Secret wars became a staple of U.S. covert operations and are still happening today. It also shows why other countries today are doing secret operations with more success. This is the book that puts what some want to deny into the light. In Denial, Secret Wars with Airstrikes and Tanks. Larry Hancock. For more information, go to larry-hancock.com. Pick up your copy of In Denial at amazon.com in digital or physical form.
Uncle, I'll bet you remember the time when Benjamin Fulford said that the Asian Secret Society was going to dispatch ninjas to take out the Illuminati to change the entire world for the better.
That is never gonna happen. That never did.
It never did it? Mm-mm. Yeah, because there's a lot of false promises.
It's fools? I can't say one.
We better not say and be polite, but there are no false promises at the OCHELLI.com radio network.
That's exactly it. It's truth, the point, right to the point. And this is what I like. Straight to the point.
OCHELLI.com. Listen now.
Listen now.
OCHELLI.com.
We should learn from our relatively recent history, my brother. That's where I'm coming from. I say all power to the people.
And now, the most underrated voice in all media.
OCHELLI. What? OCHELLI. OCHELLI. What? OCHELLI. How's your music?
Chuck Ocelli.
Second hour of the Ocelli Effect begins now here on the probably the podcast you're listening to, but some of you are on the live stream, and I do see you. Welcome to it, no matter when or where you're coming to it from. In the first hour, we had Max Egan, and that was certainly a fascinating conversation, and I think was loaded with clarity about how a lot of things can be used in order to manipulate the masses and where it is I think we're going. Now, this will be a different toned conversation, but who knows? We might end up there too, because Terry Tapp is with me. artist, activist, author. There's your AAA, but he's a lot more than that. I consider him a philosopher and quite frankly, an intellectual brother for sure, because of the types of conversations that him and I have, and the interactions we've had. I gotta tell you, I feel really great when I'm about ready to talk to this man. Now, we had a 2-hour discussion about Fight Club. And the interesting thing is, we didn't get a lot of feedback about it. I just talked to him about this off the air, by the way. We didn't get a lot of feedback about it. I expected it, but here's what the problem is. If you think about the timing for the past 14 days, which would be about when Terry Tapp was on here last, everybody has been concerned with what's going on the streets, what may not be going on the streets, what it means, and what it's going to mean. So, yeah, I know you guys are going to discover the Fight Club discussion probably later when you're not so amped up on what is. But anyway, I think it'll be extremely relevant when you get there. Terry Tapp, terrytapp.com. I will give you guys the links to not only Terry's stuff, but Max's stuff. Obviously, I'm also going to give you the links to his tattoo website. Great tattoo artist, man. I would talk to this guy just about his tattoos if that's all he did. I love his tattoo art. I love his other art, but again, terrytapp.com, a couple of social media things I'll put out there, along with the list, yada, yada. But anyway, first let's check in with him. How are you doing, Terry? I almost called you Tap. Sorry, Terry Tapp.
Well, man. It's funny. You had I think we were talking last time, before we began our, Fight Club marathon, and that was, about the show we did right as the pandemic was bearing down on us. Right. And, I felt really cratered, being next to the crater. Literally, I'm in Queens, and I was in Queens then as well. And, the very red pin globally, nationally, and in New York City for the worst of the virus was, down the street essentially. And that was terrible. So looking at that all the way to now, I feel great. I mean, my daughter and I have been out in the protests and, marching here in New York City, and it's invigorating, really invigorating. And it's also invigorating to see this response. I wondered, like we began this year, and I've had to remind people of this because events have taken place so quickly that everyone seems to have forgotten. We began this year with a threat of war with Iran brought about by the Trump regime. And I do refer to him and his Goonies as a regime, just like I did with the Obama regime and the Bush regime, so forth. But his people were pushing for a war with Iran, and that was terrifying. That was early, first couple of days of the year. And then, once we seemed to calm down a little from that, we get this, coronavirus. And I took that hard because I had a lot of things going on and the world kind of shuts down, and then you have constant ambulances here and everything. And I thought that was going to be a big narrative for this year. And it is. You can't get rid of it. But now we have the protests, and I actually feel very hopeful about that. So that's brought a new narrative, but almost a counter narrative in a sense, or one running in a different direction, but alongside the COVID-19 narrative. So that's very nice.
Well, that's that's the thing about what's going on now, where I understand, and quite frankly, here's I'm going to give you a little bit of shade real fast.
Go for it.
The one problem about this bright spot that you and I see, and I've already taken crap for this, that I see this as an opportunity to actually have a conversation which should have been had long time ago. And it is unfortunate that the guy kneeling on the football field couldn't get the right conversation had, but kneel on somebody's neck and make it a viral video, and guess what? It works. And I don't mean to say that to disparage anybody or George Floyd, I'm just saying that it took quite a while. It took quite a lot. There is a lot to this. It is not a simple thing, but I'm also a little nervous because now they're going to tell us about this second wave of COVID, And guess who's going to get blamed for it? The people that spoke up, the people that did go into the streets who, quite frankly, you interview them, you ask them, you talk to people that are participating, and they say, you know what, it's worth the risk. Even if I do believe there's a big risk, it's worth the risk. This needs to get done. And I foresee that by the end of the year, when God knows what's going to happen during the selection process, and how that turns out, I am not feeling good about looking forward to that. But I'm also not looking forward to, here's your next wave of COVID, and because all of you protested, you have now cross-contaminated the world, and we're now back to another, point where everything's got to be locked down. And I don't know that a lot of people's lives are going to withstand it being locked down again, psychologically, financially, emotionally, spiritually, whatever. I don't know that this is going to bode well for the majority of us, and it is, at the end of the day, life, which I'm concerned with. Now, sadly, during this time, a lot of focus on, look at the fires, look at the riots, look at the looting, and the reality is that it hasn't just calmed down in the past few days, Terry. It has been calm and controlled, for the most part, everywhere, but the media didn't want to represent it that way. And I mean, not just the mainstream, but, even the alternative people who are now, and by the way, I again want to note just briefly, but not go into it, the disgusting, ridiculous, and quite frankly, I know I'm not supposed to use the word retarded, but retarded attempts to create, well, let me be blunt about it. They're trying to Sandy Hook the George Floyd thing.
Yeah, I know. And the Antifa narrative, I just want to be very clear about that Antifa narrative because...
Oh, another thing, Go ahead.
I was reading, I got back to the studio today and I was reading an article, I believe it was in the Atlantic or something somewhere. It appeared online, a suggestion, and it was a good article, about Oregon, and a town in Oregon that had 200 people come out, heavily armed, not only with guns, but with baseball bats and axes, ready for Soros's busloads of Antifa warriors who are supposed to be trucked in. And on that note, I'm in New York City. I've been here for a decade. I know people from all over the world. On social media, I'm connected with all those people and people here. But I'm also connected with my, primordial stomping ground, which is West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, northern Georgia. That area of the land I know like the back of my hand. Right. And I have a lot of people there still, contacts, friends, relatives. They have bought this line about Antifa and George Soros, and I'm actually seeing a few people start to actually question it. And I had to interject. One fellow, he's a laborer. He's worked for the laborers union as not an employee of the union, but as a worker for years. And he's now in Arkansas. And he said, I've done a lot of research into Soros, and he really doesn't seem like a bad guy. I said, first, let me tell you that he's a billionaire, so he stinks because billionaires shouldn't even exist. But as far as billionaires go, he's done some good things. And I actually have known people who've worked for Soros, actually worked as employees of his foundations. And they do things like build schools in Uzbekistan. And that's what Soros is about, other than ripping people off like any other billionaire. The other thing is, I told people this, they were worried about the secret Antifa army. I said, you're speaking to Antifa. I have protested as Antifa. It's anti-fascism. It was an anti-Nazi movement in World War II, and it continued. There's no organization to it. It's just people who despise fascism and Nazism who get out in the street and put their bodies, their fists, or whatever they need in the way of that. And I said, so, this mythology that's been created by the corporate news and part of the corporate news in the United States is ridiculous, and it's diverting your attention from what's really going on. But I wanted to lay that out because I saw that today, and I thought, wow, there are so many people in the media that have bought this ridiculous narrative that I have to say that. But I'm seeing people now, like I said, my buddy and other people, they're actually questioning some of what they're seeing. And I think that leads to one of the overarching points that can be drawn from what's going on right now. My daughter's 18, and she was out with me in the protest. And she said, she was talking with people her age. And I said, one thing that's interesting about people your age is nobody is taking the time to pull the wool over your eyes. People our age, right around that 50 mark, they kind of tried to BS us. Not as hard as they did with the people a generation before us, and certainly not as hard as they did with the World War II generation and all that, and the one in between, however you want to divide them up. But they let a lot of the cracks in the system show to us that they didn't care, that they would take our jobs, that they move our jobs off, and anybody paying attention could see their American corporations are sending jobs to China. Chinese aren't taking them. They're sending them to Mexico and Honduras. The Mexicans, the Hondurans aren't taking the jobs. If you follow this, you and me, our generation, you could see what's happening. It just took a little bit of work. But the generation, I guess we call it the Generation Z now, but the generation my daughter's in, they don't care at all. The cops are out there beating people. The protests are peaceful. And I've been in them. I can tell you. I know you, but anybody listening, the cops are coming in. They're beating people. They're gassing people. They're slashing people's tires. They're doing all of this right out in front of people. Right. You probably saw in Buffalo where the elderly man, 75 years old, they just shove him to the ground. He falls and busts his head open. He's bleeding, and they just leave him. They don't give a rat's behind what you see. And for the young people, especially. And now you have companies defying very sensible environmental regulations, which were there for the protection of our health, the protection of our wildernesses. Our wilderness, I guess we'll call it as a singular. But they're openly just taking a crap on not only the future, but the present. And these young people see that. My daughter sent me a lot of things off TikTok. A lot of stuff that I call them kids because, we're getting up there, but a lot of what the kids are seeing. And, it's profound. I have her reading, she's reading a book, on anarchism. And it's funny because I told her, I said, as an 18-year-old, I didn't have any money. My family didn't have any money, but it took a little push to talk to my friends about, any sort of economic perspective that wasn't Reaganomics, or any sort of political perspective that wasn't, something the Democratic Party approved or the Republican Party approved. Because you've got food in your belly. You may be worried about money, but you're not actually in the street. You may be worried about acid rain we were worried about back then, but it's not really melting you right then. It's just out there, and there are spots where it's hitting. But you're still, you're still sitting on a porch or on a chair outside talking with people, and you're basically okay. So you're coming to this panic, theoretically, in a way. You're not in the Niger Delta and Shell Oil isn't hacking your neighbors to bits. Right. You're not, Chiquita Banana isn't paying, U.S. backed Contra forces to drag your children over barbed wire like they were doing in Nicaragua. None of that's happening, but now it is. And now they don't care. So that's an interesting piece of what's going on right now. The fact that they're not bothering to pull the wool over the eyes of the young.
See, I want to talk to you. I do want to talk about that, how they're not pulling the wool over the eyes. It's not the intentional, let's try and hide it sort of thing anymore. I want to talk to you about that, but before we go there, let me address this Antifa thing one more time because it's killing me. We have a president who's worried about the Antifa terrorists. We have people that are all over the place talking about this. It is really strange to me because I've said it over and over, and again, I've had people complain to me that I'm wrong. Here's the thing. I actually looked for an organization to join, and there is none. First of all. Secondly, the interesting thing about these claims that Antifa people are being bussed in, every time they look for these shock troops from Antifa to show up, nobody shows up. Okay, and it's because there is not an organized situation here. Antifa is not an organization. I don't know how to stress this anymore, because it's like, well, what about the Antifa people? They're organizing. No, they're not. I don't know where this came from exactly, except that, where there were some people, and I found it funny, by the way, this is before the age of put on a mask for coronavirus. I found it funny that there were anarchists in uniform.
Yeah.
That makes no sense to me to begin with, and I was like, this is clearly a collective display, all right, by some individuals. That doesn't necessarily mean that there is a grand organization behind them, even if they claim it. Now, what's funny is, through this, if you start to, dig deeply into who's actually causing the trouble, which, by the way, again, it was a minuscule amount of what actually happened on the street that was that. I know the media showed it to you. I know they showed you the fires. And, Minnesota, yeah, there was all hell breaking loose in Minneapolis for the first couple days. And, I don't deny that. And I don't deny that there hasn't been looting and fires and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And the long-term effects on a poor neighborhood are horrific. Again, I lived in Asbury Park. I mentioned this in the first hour. 30 years. There was no business that was, respectable that came into Asbury Park. It was a demilitarized zone. There were sections of that city where people didn't want to go, not even the police. There were entire apartment complexes turned into crack houses. That is a reality. That's what went on. I grew up in the 70s and 80s in that area. I know it. And it was post, late 60s riots, which, again, Asbury Park was not a banner headline, but it was, previous to being destroyed under those circumstances, a resort town, a vacation area, a place of great commerce where a lot of those things that wound up, migrating into the malls had their own buildings, your Steinbecks, your Sears, all that. They had their own, multi-level department stores in Asbury Park, all of it abandoned after the unrest. Okay? And that did no favors to anybody who had to live in that area for 30 years. Now they've gentrified it, by the way. There's wine stores and go see your hipster antiques and whatever. And that's what it is now. I'm not kidding. I couldn't believe it. When I saw it, I had to, spend a whole day Google earthing it, looking at everything, going, what in the hell went on here? But it's a weird thing. There was a culture. There was all kinds of things there. Yeah, Bruce Springsteen came out of there, yada, yada. So did Danny DeVito and Jack Nicholson. And, there's a lot of people. Came from that area, a lot of culture, a lot of interesting stuff. But here's the thing about it. That is not the majority of what's gone on. That's not even a significant minority of what's gone on. But the media represented it to you. Now they have taken this Antifa thing as if it is a grand organization, and it's caused people to create, guess what, fake organizations, presenting themselves to others as, we are Antifa. That's how backwards this reality is.
It's actually a lot of white supremacists have come out, and this is documented now.
Yeah,
and formed Antifa on Twitter to make these ridiculous threats. I can tell you who Antifa is in Kentucky. There are photos of Antifa, and from some years back. It's not that many, but I was looking at one of them, and I knew a lot of the people in there. I was one. Antifa was an artist, me, who was also a construction worker. Couple of my construction worker buddies. It was the two people in the forefront were both middle school teachers. Mm-hmm. The one guy right behind them was he was on disability, but he did deliveries. He delivered cookies for a cookie maker in Louisville, and newspapers and things like that. I can go through this. How was Antifa formed? That collection at that point by people saying, I hear that the Klan or Nazis, whomever, I don't remember who it was at that point, or the Proud Boys or the Promise Keepers or whatever shit scumbag organization is gonna come through and intimidate the population. Mm-hmm. So one person tells another says, I'm not going to put up with it. And you get out there and you fight them. And that's what Antifa did, and it still is what happened. I know people, like I said, I still go out. I didn't in this protest, but that's all it is, and it's a distraction. I didn't want to dig that rabbit hole, for this program, and I still don't. But all this is a mythology, and it's projected out when we have much more serious things. Here's a serious thing. I picked up some artwork in Manhattan from a publisher. And when I parked, walked along the streets, one restaurant, one business after another has a sign in the window, two signs, I should say. One sign says temporarily closed due to COVID-19, be back soon. Something to that effect.
Right.
The newer sign says for rent. Over and over and over. So there's your next crisis to deal with. Not just in Manhattan, which it will be big, but the economic crisis that's coming from this. And we're still kind of in a limbo, a purgatory or holding pattern, whatever, because of this, because of the CARES Act, which I know was theft on a scale unimaginable for the super wealthy. But for you and me, there was a $600 a week, you and me meaning the population, added to an extended, unemployment benefit. And a lot of people are floating with that. But that ends. And the next thing is those windows, one after another, for rent, for rent, for rent, for rent. So that's what people don't want to talk about. They'd rather talk about Space Ghost or the super force that's been brought in by crazy rich Jews and gonna invade rural Oregon. Get your axe out, son. There's a crazy Jew force.
At what point is in the modern world? I mean, I understand when the Mongols were battling the Chinese or whatever, then maybe an axe was a sensible weapon. But quite frankly, what modern civilized place is? I mean, at least get a gun.
Yeah, I mean, what are you gonna do? Like, if you've chopped wood, the thing gets stuck. Like, I know the dwarves in Lord of the Rings, they love axes, and some like Conan or King Cole, whatever. I love these barbarian stories, and the comics and the books, and they love axes.
Sure,
but it doesn't work that way. Even the executioner's axe. When they made the guillotine, the reason the guillotine was thought to be humanitarian was that big double-bladed axe is it's unstable. So you're not sure that you're not going to embed it, that you're going to hit exactly where you want. You had times when the executioner was smashing your head in. You can't take your normal cutting axe or even a maul axe, right, and run out and attack the Jewish super soldiers. I mean, if you just take a breath. Here's the thing, man, and I didn't want to go here either, but I'll say this. I've got a bunch of pieces of writing under works right now, and one thing that I've been working on is this very easy take on why we're insane right now. And part of it, that's not how it's phrased. It's much more technical, but just for the colloquial discussion here.
No problem. Sums it up rather nicely, and this would be part of it, although not the centerpiece, but go ahead.
Yeah. Why are we insane? One thing that we've done, and I noticed it in my own lifetime because I grew up largely, small town and rural, but a lot of the time I'm working as a kid, and I'm working around stuff like, farm equipment or things that will hurt you. And so I took those things seriously. And as I've gotten older and I've worked construction jobs and I worked around dangerous things, I take that danger seriously. I noticed when I was around people as a teenager even who had not worked around those things, who had done office work or had done no work at all. Right. They didn't take seriously the fact that you're going to lose fingers or feet or your life or your eye or whatever to the world. Things will fall on you.
Right. It doesn't even have to be a sharp object. Here's the thing. They don't respect the idea that thing weighs so much that if it lands on something of you, that part of you is gone. It'll be pulverized by the weight of a girder or a block of cement that is so large or whatever. If you've never worked with these things, you really don't have a good sense of how dangerous they are because you've never seen them fall. You've never seen somebody hurt. You've never seen machinery that you thought was massive and powerful, buckle under the weight of these things. Just sheer weight, not even sharpness or whatever. Forget sharpness. Everybody knows something sharp will cut you. But, I mean, the idea is they don't have respect for bigger things like that. They just don't.
Yeah, or animals, or just basically, here's the thing.
Sure.
And like I said, this is a beer kind of discussion of a much more technical book. But basically, if you look at a driving force in us as organisms, beyond, at least pop Freudian conception of libido or thanatos, of an avoidance of death itself, or a drive toward death,
right.
Is our drive to survive.
Okay.
And we have created a world in which it is easy to survive. You're not going to get eaten by a big cat. More than likely, you might, but almost certainly you're not. Almost certainly, as you're walking down the street and in Georgia there, or me in New York City, a spear from a neighboring tribe is not going to come through my chest. I'm probably not going to get cut and have an infection that's going to kill me. You go through a long list, but all those survival needs, those real threats are pretty much gone. So there's no either or, but let's just say there is a binary choice here. Let's say that we have gotten rid of our need to survive, this overwhelming drive, or we've turned it to something else. And I think it's much more logical to think that we still have that drive, but we've turned it, since we don't have any actual realistic impediments to our survival, we've turned that need into symbols of what is an existential threat. And we've become ridiculous because of that. We think that the threat of communism, or the threat of the immigrant, the dirty immigrant that's going to come and mess up our life and infect us and infiltrate our communities, or we think that Antifa, or we think that whatever you want to picture, but some symbolic threat that stands in the place of what used to be the spear in the chest from the other tribe, or the big cat that's going to eat you, or the dangerous hunt, or whatever that we've had for millennia, or eons, essentially for us. That it takes that place, and so we have to invent these things not to fulfill the need, but to give the object to the need, which itself is still there, because we have done so well combating our obstacles to survival that we won. And now we still need them, that we still need those obstacles, but we don't have them. So we create these sillinesses, and people in power who are not, for the most, the brightest, but at least the people who tell them which buttons to push and what stocks to buy are fairly bright still. And those people work hard to make sure that you have the proper symbolic target, the proper existential threat, rather than the actual existential threat that is out there still. It's just not as multiplicitous as the spear and the big cat and all the rest of this stuff, or the guys from the north that are going to crush your head in your hut at night or whatever. But you do have climate change. You do have exhaustion of resources. You do have rampant economic inequality and things like this. And of course, guys, compressing your windpipe with their knee. You have those things, right, but you don't have these other things. And so it's a purposeful misdirection based on actual human success story, and human meaning, global humanity. We've gotten rid of those dangers, but we still feel the need to fight them. And that's what's utilized by these fools. I shouldn't even say it, utilized by these corrupt leaders or their technicians to redirect us while they essentially feast upon us.
Well, and they are, look, I understand your reflex to call them fools, because they are, in the classical sense of the, the Soviet intelligence terminology, which was useful idiots. They are useful idiots, and the fact is that this is all about the okay, you want to talk about binary choices. Faux tribalism. Tribalism to some degree, now I know this is not going to be a popular point of view, but let's get to the reality of it. Tribalism caused you to have to work for a common purpose among your recognizable tribe. And therefore, this has been hijacked as well, except now your tribe is the red tie, the blue tie. Your tribe is, and as much as I can enjoy some sports, I mean, you see that faux masculinism presented as, we are the winner, and you're talking about yourself as part of this, quite frankly, portion of the NFL's corporate structure that you've identified with by color. Or Major League Baseball, or NBA, whatever. Pick one. There is a misdirection of natural things that, in their proper purpose, would cause you to seek to defend and protect and make thrive your tribe, your community, your family, and it's all been misdirected and compartmentalized into these acceptable things. These are real instincts, not just, the occupation of people that are easily amused. We're all easily amused. You see, it just depends on what your definition of easy is.
Well, I found something else during all this that has developed that I actually was kind of shocked by, because it's something that I've discussed and intellectually anticipated, but foolishly didn't realize my anticipation was late. It had already developed, and that's this. I always go toward my first instinct is to go toward a class analysis. Mm-hmm. I look at essentially a ruling class, people who have the wealth, because as much as I hate to admit it, those dollars, that's where the power lies. And because I'm an artist and I want to see things in an aesthetic and creative and much more spiritual even way. And I don't want to just think it's a bunch of money, but it is. That's where the power is. So I look at things first as a class matter. And then I put things into it that are equally important often, like race and geopolitics and things. But one thing that a guy told me a long time ago, who had been involved on the periphery of intelligence, not intelligence in general, but with the NSA, his dad was involved with it, and he got some contract work. He'd done a lot of reading, and he had some things to say. He's much older, and he said, this is years ago. He said, I see the U.S. moving further and further down the path toward an oligarchy. Mm-hmm. And I was a kid when I was talking with him. And he said, eventually, if you look at those Latin American glitterati, the generals with all of their medals and things that terrorize the populations of Central America, for instance, and sometimes South America, almost always with U.S. backing. He said they didn't just get there. What happened was you have some corrupt plutocracy. Mm-hmm. And that plutocracy, as they terrorize and plunder the population, and people get a whiff of that, they start fighting back. And you have to pay your security forces. Right. And you have to up the ante on your security forces. This is an old story, and it's not something it's not a grand revelation. But as a kid, it was a revelation to me. And he said, you can watch. He said, it's a formula. At some point, your security forces grow big enough and strong enough that they turn the guns around. They basically say, we're in charge now. Mm-hmm. And that's where you get, as Pink Floyd called them, Latin American meatpacking glitterati, these monsters from the military. Mm-hmm. What I did not see, and I'm seeing it now, I'm sure of this. I could be argued with on it with anything, but in this instant in our country's history, you have a police force that has become a separate entity, a political entity unto itself, of a kind I didn't suspect had happened. That story about paying your security forces more and more, praising them, coddling them, and giving them more and more power and more powerful weaponry until they take over, has already happened. And it's happened to us.
Right.
You know, there's an anarchist writer, I don't know if you're aware of him, Hakeem Bey. It's a pseudonym for Peter Lambert Wilson. Very good writer. He produced a piece in some zines in the 80s. One was called Boycott Cop Culture. And it opened my eyes as a kid, because he was talking about, he said, look at the narrative of the cop through American literature.
I don't remember, I'm sorry, I don't remember this man's name, his pseudonym. I do remember the title of that article.
Interesting.
And I'll tell you why. It was printed in more than one zine.
Yeah, it was reprinted a lot, actually.
Yeah, and so I saw duplicate articles in some what I would consider to be radical pieces of literature that I was embracing at the time. And I got to tell you that, again, I was a kid, and I failed to understand what he was saying, because I was still convinced that they were a mechanism. See, you get confused about who works for who.
Yeah.
And over time, what I discovered is that the policy enforcers are only going to enforce the policies they're given. But this idea that we've gotten to a point where things have been militarized from a certain perspective, it is a recent phenomena, but from a much wider and I think greatly concerned, deeper thought sort of perspective, it seems to me as though this is not any sort of evolution or de-evolution of the power structure. I mean, quite frankly, when you take a look at the way the police forces were initiated in this country, they're there for people who own property. They always were.
Yeah.
They're not there for this, this concept of public safety is an addendum. It's not the reality of what it was they were initially created for in the first place. So when I see that, the argument about, well, all lives matter and black lives matter, you know what the problem is that in the course of your and my lifetime, Terry, you and I have had no choice but to understand that these are not peace officers. These are people that do separate themselves because they are a separate subculture, even a secret society, a brotherhood that is not part of the rest of us.
Exactly.
We've had no choice but to recognize that they will do what they want to people like you and me. They will do what they want to people that are poor. Black people never had to get taught that lesson because that was always there.
Yeah, in fact, if as you said, and you're correct, the police are there to protect property. In the U.S., you have a unique situation because people at one point were considered property. Some people.
Right.
And so you have a home guard that defended that institution of keeping people as property.
Well, at the point of inception, Terry, I'm sorry to interrupt one more time, but last point. At the point of inception, some of these forces, in quotes, were put in place to do what? To be slave patrols. They were there to retrieve property which were slaves. So this is not like some, imaginary left-wing kind of, touchy-feely. I'm talking about the actual history if you face it. Yeah. And I don't mean you. I know you're aware of this. But I'm saying that I think that is something that is not fully understood. And I don't know where to begin. I don't want to be teaching history lessons because I'd like to see us move forward and change this equation. But it should be no surprise that this is the circumstance given where these things have their roots. I mean, fruit of the poison tree, as they always say, right? What are you going to do?
I really think we need to pull that poison tree up. Like we really need. I've got one of the little projects I've been working on is a slim book called Black Pill USA. Because as I've given talks at different places, people have asked me, they said, I was talking to my dad, I was talking to my friend, my boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. And I wish I could just hand them a book and say, just read this. Because, I've recommended like Gerald Horne's work. He has a new book coming out, an amazing scholar about slavery and black Jacobins and what was going on with institutions in the U.S. in the 17th and 18th century. Well, I mean, before it was the U.S., obviously, but still. And I thought, what if I just could produce a book that says point 1, point 2, point 3, basically kind of like treating Germans after World War II. When you really have to just take someone's nose, stick it in that pile and say, this is what happened to you.
Yeah.
Now, can we come back and regain our humanity? You know, I saw on Instagram, somebody posted a photo of George Stinney Jr. I don't know if you know that, you know, the young man, 14 years old, who was executed for the murder of 2 white girls in South Carolina, in 1944. And I looked at it because I thought they had some, it looked like color photographs. And I knew that was wrong. So I looked it up, and there was a video reenactment, and it's horrific. He's a kid. He's 14 and he was small. And there were 2 young girls that were murdered. I think 7 and 9, 7 and 10, something. And they pegged on this young man, and he was innocent. There was no evidence for it, but they find somebody. It's easy. Blame a black person, blame a young person. They haul him in. It took them 10 minutes to deliberate. They convict him, and they bring him in and fry him in an electric chair. And it's mind-bogglingly evil. We have to, I hate to say it this way, but, you know, if you take these corn-fed people in Oregon and in Kentucky, I'm as guilty as anybody from the same stock, who are worried about, you know, like I said, Jew warriors on a bus, you know, Jew-supported warriors. Let's be honest about what they're saying, really.
Right.
And they got their axes, you know, and they're 20-sided die. I don't know what they're going to do, you know, but they're out there worried about that.
Oh, you wish they could play Dungeons and Dragons, brother. Come on.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You know, the point is that if they knew how evil slavery was and what had actually happened, if they knew, you know, what had happened with the populations here that we, and I hate to put myself in this camp, but white people found and murdered, butchered en masse, when they came to this land, if they knew the greed and the evil that we have in our history and just stuck our noses in it as a country one moment, like Germany did. And Germany's a very civil place right now. If we could just do that and just pull it all off, acknowledge it. You know, I've talked with people about reparations. And of course, you know, I come from poor people in Kentucky, poor white people. And you talk with anyone about reparations, poor white person, if their first thing is to say, hell no, you know, what about me? I'm poor, I've got nothing. Well, of course that's true. But there's a specific problem where you had people working for free and they're never going to make it up unless you give them a bump. Basically, the bump is called what you owe them, what we owe them. You know, but you can't make that argument without going, look, dude, look at the history. Really examine this. And so I've got this little book which just goes over things like carpet bombing North Korea, invading the Soviet Union, the realities of slavery, lynching in the 50s and 40s and 30s, just a few things where you can look at it and say, wait a minute, that policy which sounds ridiculous and which has spurred all types of, silly chimeras in the news, had a realistic, rational basis. Why? I'm no friend of the leadership of North Korea. I think they're criminal. But is the paranoia North Korea has for the U.S. legitimate? Yes. We carpet bomb them. I'm not agreeing with North Korea. It's so crazy, the media's messed people's minds up so much. You have to say things like that. But there is a rational basis for their policies that you can understand and pull back and say, okay, that changes how things are structured geopolitically, and I can calm down a little because we're not in some sort of Darth Vader Star Wars situation. We're actually on planet Earth with people that have a history that we're not acknowledging. Maybe we don't even know. But to return to this for just a minute, because it's a vital point, and I'm really I can't believe I missed it because I've talked about it before. But from the 80s on, and that's when that essay by Hakeem Bey came out about boycott cop culture, you have the police being used to deal with populations in this country. Everybody, populations meaning everybody, was not super wealthy. Right. But the first avant-garde of that population of people suffering are black people because they were already suffering. They took the first blows of this. But those neoliberal policies that pull back public services, that pull back the things our tax dollars were paying for to help our neighbors, And those tax dollars got sucked up through scams through Reagan and Bush and on Clinton and all the rest. Those cops were there to deal with those problems. The main thing cops deal with right now is emotionally disturbed people. That used to be what you would have churches for, church services. You had not your church services, but programs. What you had mental health programs for. What you had all types of public programs for. Your mental health, your emotionally disturbed people. You don't want to send a guy who, thinks he's got the biggest genitalia in the world because he's carrying around all these weapons and he's got a fancy uniform and he's valorized in the media to deal with your cousin whose wife has left him, who's lost his job, who's drinking too much, he's taking opiates, and he's got an old revolver. That's the worst thing to do, is send that hot dog-necked man with his uniform and all of his rubber of things he's got from the department to deal with your emotionally distraught cousin. Because you know where that's going to go, especially if he's a white guy and your cousin's black and he's already got this idea of this crazy black man who could, turn like the Hulk and attack him, with his magic. You know where that situation is going to go. So what we've done, and I'm seeing it here in New York City big time, we've created a separate political entity, which is the police. Put that in caps. Bill de Blasio, who's a feckless moron, I like the things he said when he was running. I thought he had some good potential policies. Proposals at least, but he's done nothing, and he's just garbage like the rest of them. But the thing is, they arrested his daughter. Now, you have a child, I have a child. If someone's messing with your child, automatically, I think you're excused with just being angry, with being angry before you hear the facts.
Yeah, of course. And
having to calm down. This guy backs up immediately. And he says, but you put the police in a bad situation when you protest. He's just immediately kissing their boots. And, listening to that, I thought, that's it. He's afraid. These other mayors are afraid. They're afraid of their own police. When you see police take a 75-year-old man and shove him to the ground and let him bleed out from his head, when you see them, they took one of their guns shooting these the so-called beanbags, but they're essentially lethal, especially at a close range. I've been shot with them, and they will break bones and shoot an elderly woman in the face. There are too many incidents to recount. And I was on Canal Street marching, and they came out, they pulled out, and it's a peaceful march. Nobody's doing anything. They pull out all of a sudden, batons raised, and just start whacking people. When that can happen, and a peaceful protest, when you can have this, orange-haired con man to fly in the Air Force and gas people out of the way so he can hold up a Bible and gloat about whatever he's doing now, you've lost control. And it's not just a class analysis, which I think is usually a legitimate move to look at, who's got the bucks and who's making these policies to further impoverish you and control you. You've actually got a new player, which is your armed domestic force, the cops. Right. And they're not listening to people.
Well, see, that's the key right there, is that they are in a position where they have been granted the ability to not listen to anything. And look, in that same scenario with the breakup and all that, recently here in Macon, Georgia, there was a guy who went on a rampage, quite frankly. Stole his kids, tied up his soon-to-be ex-wife, because they were going through a rough divorce. And in the case where this guy was charging at the police with a truck and everything else, they shot and killed him. I don't complain about it. I got to tell you why. Because the guy was being a public menace. He was out to harm people. And he was out to harm a lot of people, I think. He was really in that deranged state. And when somebody is in that position, I don't object to them having to deal with him. You're presenting lethality to the public. It's their job to do it. But here's the issue.
Well, let me just interject this, and you can continue. Well, my brother was a cop. He had situations like that. And he actually asked me, he said, he was a state trooper. He said, if you want to be on the force, I could help you get into the training. You know, he can't do it for me. Like, get me on the force. But he said, make sure you get into the camp. And, he gave me some scenarios. We were talking about them. I said, in those scenarios, I'd shoot the guy. He didn't. And he told me, he said, you know, you got a guy, like you said, in a deranged situation. One guy was with a knife, threatening people, and he ended up tackling him. You know, that guy might be having, like, I understand he's posing deadly force to the community, but he might be you. He might be me. You know, if your old lady, my girlfriend, whatever, comes and says, you know, I'm sleeping with your best friend, and I cleaned out the bank account, and you get drunk, I mean, you might be a good guy, but put under a certain amount of pressure with certain substances, and you're a monster.
No,
Do you deserve to be killed for it?
Well, no, you don't. But at a certain point, it is a matter of figuring out which does less harm. I don't object to their decision based on the scenario that I saw play out. Sometimes that's going to happen. However, the default position should not be to do that. The default position is. See, but that's the thing, is that I've been involved in interactions. Now, look, when I was a juvenile, I probably deserved some of the ass kickings I got. I was a criminal as a kid. I get it. And you know what? I wasn't worthy of being abused the way I was, but I don't even cry about it. It's you know, came with the territory. Yeah. But when I'm a grown man and I ask a question like, what, you know, why are you questioning me, or what is this about? And you wind up getting roughed up or cuffed up one way or the other, not even arrested because they couldn't charge me with anything. I wasn't doing anything. Yeah. But when you get in these situations and, you know, you wind up getting hurt, you wind up getting knocked around, God forbid you could get shot. I've had more than one cop with his grip on his gun, and I could see, and I'm not a well-sighted person, but I could see the pressure in his hand. He's waiting to draw it.
Yeah.
Because I asked a question. This is not the situation that I should be in. This is not the situation a lot of people should be in. It's not uncommon, and it is about a culture. There is a useful time for when, yes, there's going to be a need for people to step up and take care of certain things. You know, again, not necessarily we need no police here, but the idea that they are given carte blanche to be abusive to people across the board, and unless you can figure out a way to get you a high-priced lawyer, you might have a chance to sue the state and lose, most likely. You know, and all that, all of this could be dealt with in a different way. Most of it could be dealt with in a different way. Are there going to be scenarios where there are split-second decisions? And quite frankly, I've got little place to judge when somebody makes a determination based on reasonable circumstances that they may need to use lethal force. Because someone, I mean, there is a concept of suicide by cop which is legitimate. Okay, where there are individuals that are looking for this. But they also know that, we also know, I should say, because I can't speak to the mindset of everybody, we also know that they know they can get themselves killed in interactions with the police, because it is not that uncommon. You know, the idea that video has gone out, because remember that elderly gentleman you talked about, well, he tripped and fell, don't you know, Terry?
They can actually say that when you know, let me stop you for just a second, because I do want to add this, just to throw this in with what you're saying. When my brother was in the state police in Kentucky, he said something to me that shook me up, and I explained to him why, and he didn't notice, but this was a sea change in our culture. He told me he had to go to court, and he explained a case. It's irrelevant and it takes too much time to say, but it was a complicated case. And I said, do you ever wonder if you're going to have to, like, really get into all these details about this? He said, no. He said, there's an agreement that the cop's word is never challenged. And I said, you said that before, and I hadn't really heard you, but I'm listening to you now. If the cop's word is never challenged, why is there even a judicial system? And he stared at me, and in silence, we both looked at each other, because something had happened. My girlfriend's great-grandfather went to jail. He was a cop in the mountains. A guy was running after committing a crime, and he shot him, and the guy died. And they said, you didn't have to shoot him. He was a criminal. He committed a crime. You could have done a lot of things rather than shoot him.
Right.
And put the guy in jail for several years. Go from that to my brother sitting there saying, I don't have any problem. I mean, anything I say, they're going to back me.
Yeah.
That's a sea change. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just wanted to add that because that's incontrovertible evidence of two different cultures.
No, I've got absolutely nothing to add to that because, believe it or not, we went through a whole hour. and the fact is
so big,
it flies so quickly with you, Terry. But that speaks volumes, what you just mentioned. Of course, go to terrytapp.com, take a look at his artwork. A lot of other things outside of his political and social analysis, which you get on here a lot. We went in a direction that I didn't expect tonight, and I don't think Terry expected it either, but this is what happens when you don't have a script. Anyway, Max Egan, thank you for the first hour, but of course, Terry Tapp, terrytapp.com, which is a working website now, and the tattoo website. I'll give you links to all of that in the show notes. But remember, until tomorrow night at the very least, I'm merely O'Chelli, and all of you are indeed the effect. Take care.